So I'm real excited about this discussion today and partnering with Tall Oaks. Tall Oaks Assisted Living is who brought this great presenter and topic to us. And but taking a little stroll down memory lane because if today's Thursday, and this photo that you see on the screen, I'm there in the middle with my dog. This was back in the 1990s, and it's when they called the what is now the Walk to End Alzheimer's. It was called the Memory Walk, and I the reason that I'm bringing this up is our speaker today is from the Alzheimer's Association, but more importantly, we've got this Walk to End Alzheimer's, which is nationwide, and it's happening at the end of the year. And I know, Leslie, that Tall Oaks is very involved with this initiative. But tell us a little bit about yourself and Tall Oaks, and then we're gonna get on with our discussion with Aaron.
Thanks, Steve, so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Leslie Lawson. For those of you that me. I'm the Director of Community Relations and Marketing at Tall Oaks Assisted Living. I am not going to derail us jumping into this presentation too much, but I will share that Tall Oaks has been providing memory care and assisted living in Reston, Virginia for over 3 decades. We're going to be celebrating 35 years next year. We are also on the committee for the Walk to End Alzheimer's in Reston. That event is actually October 23rd. We have been raising funds all year and we could use your help. So I will be sending some information about the walk and how all of you can get involved to really help raise awareness and hopefully find a cure. Just a little plug for Tall Oaks events coming up. This is one of our Everything You Need to Know events that Steve has so graciously worked with us on to get the word out. And I'll be plotting this in the chat, but we do have a lot of upcoming events, many surrounding memory care on Alzheimer's disease that are informative, and the whole purpose is to help with awareness. I'll be putting those in the chat. And just a quick plug for our event next week. We have, or 2 weeks, we have a cybersecurity scam, a virtual event that will be online, pivoted towards seniors, but really it affects us all. And I hope that you can join me for that as well. Without further ado, I'm going to toss it back to Steve, who's going to introduce our speakers, but I do want to thank Aaron and Karen for being here today. This program that we're showing today is new. The Alzheimer's Association is rolling it out this year. It has not been seen before. I think Aaron's done it maybe twice this year already, and it is intensive. So I will say that we will be having a continuation of this following this event. There will be more to come. And after the event, for all of you, any questions we don't get to, any topics that seem to be hot topics, I'll be working with Aaron and Karen to send follow-up emails with resources, links, etc., to each of you to make sure you have all the information and everything you need to know about this topic. Thanks and enjoy the show.
Yeah, this is great, Leslie. Thanks for, I was totally unaware of this this program that Alzheimer's Association created. So thanks for bringing it to my attention and consequently enabling us to share this with the community. And so today what we've got Aaron Schulman, who is on stage, and then we've got Karen Fagan, who's behind the scenes, and there she is. But Karen is going to be responding to Q&A and chat and things like that, so that if you've got a question related to Aaron's topic or anything like that, you can drop it in there and Karen will get to it. So Aaron, thanks for doing this presentation. We're real excited to see it, most of us, for the first time. Before we dive into the program, tell us a little bit about yourself and what led you to your current role at Alzheimer's.
Well, first, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Leslie. We appreciate being here. So, yeah, I live, in the Reston area, and I retired about 4 years ago. I had a career in strategy consulting. And when I was getting ready to retire, I was trying to figure out, how can I give back to the community? What were some ways to do that? And Alzheimer's Association was rated very high in terms of working with volunteers and whatnot, and they have an amazing mission. And although I don't have a family history of Alzheimer's and dementia, a lot of my friends' families do. So it was a way for me to get involved. And now what I do, I do presentations like this and other topics throughout the national capital area. I'm also a member of the association's National Alzheimer's Association Volunteer Advisory Board. So we look at programs across the country, including the one we're going to be talking about today. So looking forward, to providing this information.
Great. Okay, well, I'm going to drop behind the scenes here, but I want to remind our audience that at any point in time, if you've got a question, just type it in. And Aaron, if you want to take a few breaks, you can check in with us, and we'll read any relevant questions. And real excited to see what you have to share.
All right, thanks again, Steve. Greatly appreciate it. And folks, when we do the bit of the presentation, we're going to use some video snippets, and I know some people's connections may be faster than others, so I may wait for a moment after a little video snippet to make sure everybody is caught up. I'm also going to share my screen here in a moment, and I'm going to ask Steve, Leslie, or Karen just to confirm that they're able to see the screen once I do start to share it here.
You're good.
We're good. Excellent. That's the right response. So the topic today is managing money, a caregiver's guide to finances. And when you're a caregiver, there's a lot of things that may come up that are unexpected, whether it's financial, legal, etc. So we're going to touch on a range of items. And as Leslie mentioned, we're not going to get into every single detail. I'll explain that in just a moment. But I want to give you a highlight here that this program was developed over the course of last year through a grant from HHS, a government grant. And although we're going to talk about suggestions, ideas on finances and legal related issues and legal documents, it's not to take away from professional assistance. If you have questions that get into more detail, we strongly recommend that you talk to a professional about your financial situations, legal situations, particularly with your loved ones. And when this program was developed, it wasn't just the Alzheimer's Association. There was a range of people from around the country that got involved in this. This is just a snippet of the steering committee, AARP, some of the financial advisory firms, National Alliance for Caregiving, individual care, a whole range of folks were involved in putting together this program. Now, as Leslie mentioned, we're not going to cover every single detail. This is actually a much larger program. We're going to go over some of the key highlights. So I'll skip over some slides, but I just want to give you a quick sense. When we say there's a lot in this program, if you look on that left side, I'm scrolling down. These are all different topics, and within these are even little videos and workshops and activities. So we're not going to be going over every one of those. I'm trying to get back out of that. I will see if I can here in a second. Why is it not putting me out? Probably because I've shared my screen. I'm going to go off share here so you don't have to see that the whole time. I'm going to go back.
Aaron,
Yeah.
I was going to say, try clicking those three lines.
I don't see, that's the problem. So on mine, I couldn't see the three lines. So if you just give me 1 second, mine was blocked because of the way it was being shared. So hold on one moment, and I'm gonna get back out of this. Are you still able to see my screen?
Not right now.
Okay, so I'm gonna get out of this. Okay, we're going to go back to share. I apologize for this
No worries.
delay here. And we're going to go back into share, and
there we go. Okay.
there we go. So
Okay.
let me make this full screen. So we're going to talk about how finances affect caregiving, the impact of Alzheimer's and dementia, on caregiving. And by the way, I want to quickly mention Alzheimer's and dementia. We often hear the term together. Alzheimer's is one type of dementia. There's actually about 14 major types of dementia. You may hear the term Lewy body, frontal temporal lobe. So Alzheimer's is the most common type, but it's just one type of dementia. We can talk more about that in Q&A. I just want to give you that quick sense. We'll talk about some of the legal and financial documents, the importance of having discussions as early as possible with funds, and putting plans in place, not waiting until to the last minute, because that can really be difficult. And I'll probably refer to a couple of the friends that I mentioned, Mark and Caroline, and maybe Fran and Sammy, who've had to deal with these kinds of issues and weren't necessarily prepared. So I'm going to skip through a couple, as I mentioned, some of the slides. So in terms of a perspective, what percentage do you think of caregivers have out-of-pocket costs as a result of caregiving? And these are usually costs that they don't expect. So if you are a caregiver for parents, a spouse, other friends or a relative, it's about 78% of people that are caregivers are providing expenses, out-of-pocket expenses, that they probably weren't originally planning on. That's very important to understand. So it has a significant impact being a caregiver. Also, for some people, being a caregiver, it's going to affect their employment. They may have to reduce hours. Our friends, they've had to cancel their vacation time because they had to spend the time with their relatives. It was extremely difficult. Other people we know have had to literally stop working altogether to be able to care for their parent. So there can be a significant impact on a person's employment. Let's hear from Kim. This will be one of those video snippets, and she'll give you a perspective of what it's like for her as a caregiver.
So some of the sacrifices I've had to make financially due to having to care for my mom were things like paying for some of her care, doctor visits in some cases, clothing, to try to limit the spend down of her money. So I supplemented where I could, and then retired early, which impacted my income to continue to care for her, and then looking into getting a part-time job to supplement her memory care, facility care.
So it can be exceptionally hard. And this is just one example. Kim is one example of many, and everyone's situation is a little bit different, but the impact can be quite significant. And it's not just finances. It can also impact health. And it doesn't matter whether this is Alzheimer's, dementia, or other medical situations. In my case, my brother and I, my dad had cancer, and we just strapped it on, and we figured, okay, we're going to figure out how we're going to make this work. And we did, myself, my family, my brother's family, we took on that caregiving role without thinking through what it was going to take, and the emotional toll, the financial, impact as well. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of resources to help a person who's maybe new to being a caregiver or have been a caregiver, that they don't have to reinvent the wheel, and they can understand it's important for them to be healthy if they're going to be able to take care of their loved one. So it's important, we may mention this again, because so many folks literally will burn out, because it's important to take care of that family member, but it can be very hard at the same time. Not to scare you, just to make sure folks are aware. There's also a workbook associated with this overall program. We're not going to go into the workbook, but we can provide the workbook to you through Leslie and Steve, and make that available. And when we go over maybe a more detailed program, Leslie mentioned, perhaps we'll go to the more detailed program at some point with Tall Oaks. We'll get more into working through the workbook and some of the other activities. Let's talk a little bit about, how the disease, how like Alzheimer's and dementia affects, finances specifically. I'm going to skip this. These are a couple. So I want to give you a perspective of the stages of Alzheimer's and when things are impacting finances in particular. So we call it early, middle, and late stage. And a person with Alzheimer's will typically, once they've been diagnosed, will live about 5 to 8 years. That's the average. Some people that will live as long as 15 years. I mentioned Fran and Sammy. Sammy's mom passed away this past Monday from Alzheimer's, and she had the disease. She was diagnosed and lived 15 years. The impact on the family in terms of finances and who was caring for her was significant, because they didn't expect that it was going to be as long a time frame. They had planned somewhat, but not to the extent that perhaps that they needed. But early, mid, and late stage, most people will stay most of the time in that middle stage where they're having more difficulty being able to take care of themselves. Early stage are able to take care of themselves. Late stage, perhaps not at all, and they might be in full-time care. What happens is at the early stage, a person might have problems with basic arithmetic. Say they kept a checkbook and now they can't add and subtract correctly. To them, they think in the way their brain is working that it looks correct, but the numbers are not adding up. So they're starting to make small financial mistakes. Other times they might not. It's like, hit or miss. There's some cognitive impairment that's occurring. But as a person gets into that middle stage, the disease is getting worse, and they're not able to make good financial decisions. And as the disease progresses, they can become, targets for abuse. Leslie's talked about a program they have coming up through Tall Oaks on the cybersecurity and fraud and whatnot. This is the type of thing where a person with Alzheimer's or dementia, that middle stage in particular, can be much more of a target. But a lot early planning will help us deal with, okay, if a person's starting to have mistakes, what are some of the things that we can do about it? We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But just giving that sense, and this is what I think I've already highlighted, that on the impact on a caregiver is, if you're new to caregiving and you're about to take care of mom or dad or a spouse or another loved one, your income may actually start to go down because you're spending more time with that person, or you're having to do some out of pocket. At the same time, expenses are going up. There's more care, things that you might not have expected in terms of medical, non-medical expenses. So it can be very significant. We'll hear from one of the other caregivers here and get a perspective.
So when we finally moved into assisted living, when we first got the cost, it was going to be $5,000 a month. When we started adding on daily medications and housekeeping and all the other things that come with it, we were quickly at $6,000 per month. In my mind, every month I was, doing the calculations of, all right, how much money does Dan have left? How long can this last? What happens when that goes away?
So with Rebecca, again, not understanding how long is that money going to last. My wife and I, we are going to be responsible for my brother-in-law who has some special needs. My mother-in-law passed unexpectedly last year. Luckily, she was very well organized and a lot of those things were figured out. But because she died unexpectedly, we had to quickly focus on getting powers of attorney, medical powers of attorney for my brother-in-law to be able to help him in case he was in further need. So planning is extremely important, not only if it's Alzheimer's or dementia, but for any type of situation. Now, just want to briefly highlight, it's unique challenges for dementia caregivers. You're going to have twice the average out-of-pocket costs of care, about $11,000 a year on average. That's a lot of money that you might not have expected if you're taking care of a dementia or Alzheimer's related loved one. It's very hard. 2/3 of caregivers tend to be women, and they're the ones that are dealing with these issues of depression and anxiety, and feel like they're not sometimes able to talk with others because they feel like they should just be strapping this on, and often won't go to get additional help and resources. And there's a lot of resources available. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Before we go into more detail on early planning, I want to ask Steve if there is any questions that have come up.
Yeah, actually, well, several folks have asked about the workbook, and we can they get the workbook without sort of taking the course? Is that possible?
Yes, in fact, we'll make sure via Karen that anyone that wants the workbook can get the workbook, and no, they don't have to take the course.
Okay.
If they would take the course, and we will go through the workbook in more detail. But yes.
Okay, great. And then, yeah, Annette said, I guess she was intrigued when you showed this long list of additional content that you had. Is that all that information is in the workbook?
Not all of it. So that level of detail, the workbook is more of, how to help a person with the planning, whether it's financial or legal planning. So the amount of detail through, I'll say the full course, is probably not covered fully in that workbook, because there's just a lot, not everything in the workbook is, part of the program. I'll say it's more of a help planning guide.
Okay, and then for Nancy and others, this is being recorded. It'll be on our site and on Tall Oak's site later. Well, on our site later this afternoon, so you'll be able to review it. And then the last sort of a comment is Robert is talking about the benefits for veterans and the veterans aid and attendance. Will you be discussing that today?
Just very briefly, I'm going to show a slide where there's a range of resources that people can go to, including, talking about the VA benefits. We may be able to talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A, but am I going to go into that in detail? Not for this, I'll say higher level program, just because there are so many different benefits for different populations that we can get into.
Okay, and then also the other question that just popped in from Elizabeth is on the workbook, are there samples for power of attorneys?
Karen would know that better than I. I don't believe there is.
Okay.
No, there are not.
Okay. All right. Well, Elizabeth, we'll try to get you some resources for power of attorney. I've got your email, so I can follow up on that. All right. Let's jump back in.
All right, sounds good, Steve. Thanks. And we will show a slide of for also some legal resources where you might be able to get more of those standard powers of attorney. And again, I want to caution people, although for a lot of folks, doing something standardized and say, quote, via online can be helpful. It's always good, if possible, to check with a professional just to make sure you're doing things correctly. Every state has different rules and regulations. So just a small caution there. So, when we talk about who can benefit from putting financial plans in place, it's really everybody. It doesn't matter whether it's a person that has no money or a lot of money, retiring soon, a caregiver. Everybody can benefit. And that was what the steering committee was explaining when they were putting this thing together. Everyone can benefit from having a plan and not waiting until the last minute to try to put a plan into place. So we're going to talk a little bit about, those benefits. One benefit, and this, I'm going to give you the example. I mentioned my best friends, Mark and Caroline. Caroline's parents live in Springfield. Actually, now they live in an assisted living facility, memory care unit in Alexandria, but they lived in Springfield. And Caroline's and both parents were developing cognitive impairment. Both ultimately got diagnosed with Alzheimer's. What happened, though, is Caroline and Mark didn't want to rock the boat with their parents. They didn't want to upset them. They didn't want to have discussions about finances or issues. So they waited. They waited a year. Then they waited a year and a half. At the 2-year mark, it was actually extremely difficult because both parents were not having a lot of clarity. They had a lot more cognitive impairment. And having those kinds of discussions were very difficult. So them waiting that extra year and a half to 2 years made it very, very difficult because the parents at that point thought maybe Mark and Caroline were stealing from them, that all they wanted to do was take their house. They didn't trust them. They just didn't have that kind of clarity. There was a lot of suspicion. So having that kind of conversation earlier is extremely important. We'll hear from Gail here as well, get her perspectives of what the benefit of early planning is.
My mother, by putting plans in place early, that really helped me because it gives me a sense of confidence that I'm doing the things that she really wants to be done. It allows me to not have to worry about decisions that I make because my mother has already laid out the plan. She's stated her wishes, and my role is really to execute those plans. I find I have found that making decisions for my own situation can often be difficult. And so it's even harder to make decisions, especially when it comes to medical decisions, financial decisions, to have that responsibility of making those decisions for someone else can be very, very difficult. So in that my mother was so prepared and had laid out financial plans and really had a structure around her life, that has really allowed me to be less anxious as I perform the caregiving role.
So that's the kind of story that we hear from so many different types of caregivers. And I'll give you another perspective. My mother-in-law, who died unexpectedly last year from a post-surgical heart issue, she at least was well organized. She was previously a bookkeeper during her life and had a lot of her papers very well organized. But she didn't expect to die, and a lot of the plans and in what she wanted to do with things such as finances were not clear. By chance, my wife and I were cleaning out her small home in Los Angeles, and we found a piece of paper stuck in a drawer that had been written a year and a half earlier. And on that handwritten piece of paper said, if I were to die, I would like the grandkids to get this amount of money. I'd like the nieces and nephews to get this, and charities to get this amount. We just happened to come across that piece of paper. Even though she was well organized, it was just happened to be stuck in a drawer. But the point here is having plans, planning earlier, making sure people are aware of your plans is extremely important. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as well, because it is that important for this type of program. And again, those early benefits. So what a person wants, the quality of life, what they want to happen with their money, what they want to happen, legally, those powers of attorney being put in place, all those things are extremely important. And it can be very difficult to have these discussions with a loved one, but it's important to have the discussions. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. We even have a whole separate program just on effective communications, because it is so important to have the communications, and it can be very difficult to have the conversations. So we'll talk a little bit about it here, but there's even a whole other program just on that as well. So let's talk a little bit about conversations and finances. We're not going to get into a lot of detail here, but I just want to give you a little bit of snippet on this and a little bit of info, because it is extremely important. Whether you're going to be talking with a loved one, or you're the one that's been recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's, dementia, or even another illness, it can be very difficult to figure out how to start a conversation, how to go through it. So the point is just getting it started. Oftentimes we'll recommend, think about what it is that you want to discuss. So say mom or dad has recently been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia. What is it that you want to know? You might want to find out, well, what kind of documents already exist? What are financial legal documents that might exist? Where are they within the home, or a safety deposit box, etc.? Where are account numbers, etc.? Again, it can be very disconcerting to the loved one, to the parent who's been recently diagnosed, that suddenly people want to know, well, wait a second, you want to know all about my finances and legal. Everyone's situation is different. So you want to figure out, you don't want to wing it on the kind of conversation. You want to think about it. You want to think about who should be part of the conversation. Maybe it's not you. Maybe it's another family member or a friend. Person that's dealing with cognitive impairment, you may have to have the conversation multiple times because they literally may forget. And if a person is anxious that you're talking with, you might want to cut the conversation and do it again at another time and place. But you don't want to wing it. You want to think through the conversation you're about to have, who's going to have that conversation, and what you're going to cover. You want to be sincere. You want to really listen to that person as well and understand their needs and wants. You may want to know where documents are, but that person might be extremely anxious, and you also need to be empathetic and sit and take your time with them. Some additional tips, asking just asking your loved one about their wishes. What do they want as the disease progresses? If they're able to talk about that, they may say, you know, I want to make sure I have enough Frank Sinatra music to listen to, or I love these types of movies and videos. I want to make sure as the disease progresses that I have that available. I want to make sure that, you know, the grandkids have some money for college, whatever it may be, trying to have some of those types of discussions. But if a person's already getting into that middle stage, they may not be able to have long conversations. So short questions, short conversations, extremely important. Stopping, pausing, realizing that they may not be able to follow a conversation very, very clearly. As I said, we have a whole other program that gets into this in more detail, but it's extremely important that you check yourself before sitting down with a loved one about having this kind of conversation, and be empathetic, put yourself in their shoes, what they're dealing with. We'll hear again from Kim, you know, from her perspective.
Advice I'd have for other caregivers if the conversation about finances doesn't go well at first is to keep trying. It took a while for my mom to come around, and I was exasperated. I would try to catch her at a good moment, and sometimes she'd give me a little tidbit here or there. So it might take time to just pull it all together. It's sort of trying to understand the moment if you're having a good time. What I did also was to bring up friends. My mother was very empathetic. So if I'd say, oh, remember so-and-so? They had a situation with their mom or dad or family member where something happened and the person didn't know what to do, or they didn't have understanding about it. So that was really hard on them. She'd say, oh, really? And I say, yeah, see, that would help me if, you know, we talked about that kind of thing. And that would usually get her. So in my case, that empathy is what I would kind of try to use for her to open up more, but continuing to do it, catching on a good day. That was key, because it took time and it was piecemeal. Small victories, just get as much as you can over time and keep at it, because there usually will be a window where you can kind of break through, or in some cases it might be someone else has to talk to them.
So I want to re-highlight a couple points there from Kim. You know, not only finding what's the good day, but a good time of day. So a person that may be dealing with Alzheimer's or dementia, late afternoon and early evening may not be a good time, because they may have what they would call sunsetting. They may have less clarity during the late afternoon or early evening. So maybe a good time of day is after breakfast or after lunch. So again, depends on the person, but you want to figure out the right time, the right setting, all extremely important. Let's go over a couple examples of you know, how to even start a conversation with a loved one. So say you have to sit down with mom or dad or a grandparent and have a conversation. You want to be positive as much as possible. You know, you can see here, I've always admired the way you handle your finances. I'd like to learn more about what works well for you. Or I've noticed you seem worried about your finances these days. What worries you the most? How can I help? And definitely a key part, and it's different for different people on how you would approach it. Now, I respect your privacy, Mom, though I would like, you know, to have peace of mind, you know, if I knew like where your financial plans are, how well in place they are, what I can do to help, etc. So I can follow your wishes as, you know, things progress. Everyone's situation is a little bit different, but you want to be positive, you want to be empathetic, you want to check yourself before having these kinds of conversations. Please don't wing it. Now, what happens if you're the person that's been diagnosed? Or you're just working on planning. So again, I don't care if you've been diagnosed, you're not sick, etc. The goal is for everyone to have plans in place. So talking to your kids or your spouse, you know, I want to talk with you about finances so you can access them in case of an emergency. Here's where the account information is. Here's where my you know, online passwords are, etc., etc. Those kinds of conversations are good for everyone. I'll give you an example. My niece unexpectedly passed away last year. We did not have what was called a cyber power of attorney at the time, or my brother didn't, but she passed and we had no access to her accounts. We had no idea what her information was. She was still relatively young. Now, based on that, we've put in for our own kids and ourselves these basically cyber powers of attorney, so we can access accounts and contact, whether it's a Facebook or an Amazon and whatnot, to be able to have conversations legally with those entities, and they're able to work with us to close accounts or to deal with balances, etc. I want to talk now a little bit about financial abuse and fraud, and it's understanding what Leslie said. You guys are going to be having a cybersecurity fraud type session in I guess 2 weeks. We're going to touch on this briefly because it is very hard when you're dealing with a loved one who might be a target of financial abuse. So on average, for Americans that are over 80 years old, they're losing on average about $40,000 a year. That's how much they're being targeted. Bad guys know that they're an easy target, and they're constantly getting more sophisticated in how they're going after this target population. This is data from a few years ago. That number's probably increased by now. So it's an extremely tough issue, but it's something that we do need to deal with. Let's talk a little bit about that. It can occur with anybody. It doesn't even have to be someone with Alzheimer's or dementia. A lot of seniors get targeted. Those with dementia are even at a greater risk, no surprise, because they can't remember that they're being abused. They may not remember that they've already given money to someone or to an organization. They may, just have struggling with, financial decisions. I want to give you an example of a colleague of ours. His name's Bob. He tells the story of there's a father, a widower. He lives alone. He's in his early 80s. And he's always liked people, always cared for people. And one afternoon, this old beat up car with a family in it pulls up in front of his house. And they knock on the door and say, "Sir, we're running out of gas and we have no food to feed our children. Can you give us some money?" And the father said, "Well, I only have like $20 here, but I have more money in the bank." And he's starting to struggle with a little bit of cognitive impairment. He said, well, we can take you to your bank some money. He said, "Oh, I'd be happy to help you. You look so, things are unfortunate for you." They took him to the bank in their old broken down car, a couple miles away. But luckily, the family of this father had already put in limits on how much could be taken out at one time. He had over $20,000 in his account. However, when he went to take money out, the limit that had been put in place was $200. So what happened? He was able to get $200. The family had asked for $2,000. He said, "Sorry, I can't get you $2,000. I can get you $200." He gave the father the $200. And what did that family do? They left him standing there in the parking lot, and they tore out of the parking lot with the money and left him standing there in shock. He had no idea. This was just a scam that was going on in that area. So a lot of different types of scams. It can be very, very difficult. How do you know, like, if a person may be having problems with money? If you're going to a loved one's house, it could be a friend, it could be a relative. They have a lot of unopened bills. They're forgetting to pay bills like utilities, and utilities are getting shut off, obviously a significant thing. Unusual large purchases, purchasing the same item many times because they don't remember that they've already purchased something. They see something on TV, for example. "Oh, I like that. I'll purchase it." And they'll purchase it the next day and the next day because they forgot that they've already purchased it. They still like the item. And repeat donations to telemarketers that are calling. And then, of course, missing money and unexplained withdrawals. All these are very disconcerting, but are different signs. So what do we do about it? There's different ways. As I mentioned, if you can get on an account with your loved one, with your, say it's a parent, it's your spouse, obviously, but another relative, being on the account can help put things in place. You can have checks and balances there. If the person is still not fully cognitively impaired, you might be able to agree with them to put spending limits on credit cards, on amounts of withdrawals, doing auto payments for bills, forget to pay a bill, a range of different things that can be done to to deal with these kinds of situations?
So one of the things that I did, my father was very proud. He really didn't want to admit that he had Alzheimer's. So I wanted him to be able to continue to feel good about himself. So I actually set up a checking savings account for him that was joint with me, because again, I had power of attorney, so I could move things around a bit. I made sure that he always had $200 in that account. Everything else was protected, and he really didn't have access to it anymore. But he didn't know that because he still had that $200. A couple of years into his diagnosis, he actually had somebody stop at his home. He was outside working in his yard. They came by, a couple old.
Now, I'm going to skip out of that because it's going to be a slight repeat of Bob's story, slightly different, but it's a similar type of thing where it's a scam that is going on. And I know our time is getting a little tighter, so I'm going to scroll through a few other slides here, particularly about documents, plans, things that we need to have in place. So I'm not going to go into each of these in detail here, but I do want to give you a sense of, you want to understand what's the budget for your loved one. What are their expenditures? What kind of assets and debts do they have? Helping them work through that if it's not already identified. But understanding your budget, whether you're dealing with an illness or not dealing with it, is good to know. So what is your budget? What's your income streams? What are your debts and your assets? And then identifying costs of care. So if it is a loved one who's dealing with Alzheimer's, dementia, or another medical need, how much are their prescriptions per month? How much has to be provided out of pocket that's not provided by insurance? Understanding all that based on where their budget is extremely important. And making arrangements for ongoing financial responsibilities. If, in addition to you, maybe you're helping your spouse or your parent, who else can help if you were not available? If suddenly you are not able to help that person, who else has knowledge about what's going on and what the expectations are for the care of that person? Extremely important to identify. So having those, finances organized and making sure that there's more than one person that knows what the plan is and the way ahead. We talk about, and this was a question I think related to the VA, and we're not going to go into these in detail for this purpose of this high-level workshop, but there's a range, obviously, of personal resources, the different types of accounts where, funding is available. There's federally funded sources, whether that is from the VA or through Social Security disability or compassionate allowance. Say a person has not qualified for SSI, if they are younger than the traditional Social Security date, they might be able to get a approval to get some type of disability coverage if they've gotten Alzheimer's or dementia, but have developed it at an earlier age. And then obviously, Medicare, Medigap, that supplemental insurance through Medigap, all these kinds of resources. There's a lot of information that's available. You can go to benefitscheckup.org. And the association, I want to highlight this for folks that aren't aware, that 800-272-3900 number, again, 800-272-3900. This is a free helpline from the association, 24/7, 365 days a year. You can call them for any questions you have, and they'll be able to try to help you with whether it's resource issues, questions about caregiving, where there's caregiving support groups here in the Washington area, etc. We have master level clinicians that are staffing these helplines, and they're there. The whole purpose is for free to help the community that are dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia and the caregivers associated with that. Quickly, legal, you want to make sure that the legal plans are put in place, and then again, if you're not available to help provide that care, is someone else designated to provide that care? You may be saying, well, it's got to be me. I'm going to take care of mom or dad, but maybe it's your children, or maybe it's another friend that is also indicated in the legal documents to help care, because otherwise they may not be able to, and the state might have to make decisions on their behalf. We don't necessarily want that to happen. So, we want to make sure we have the documents in place. Someone asked about powers of attorney, templates. There are plenty of templates that are available. Again, strongly recommend, if possible, that get advice from a professional, because state laws and requirements tend to be a bit different. What is, effective here in Virginia may be different than in DC, than in Maryland. So just please be careful. Get the legal documents put in place, but also just don't make assumptions. And I mentioned that there's a range of resources. We can provide this slide as well out to folks through Leslie and Steve. Legally, there's a range of resources that are available. So when you were talking about those powers of attorney and getting guidance on that, you can see we have, like, I think 4 or 5 listed right on this slide. Same thing with financial. There's a range of financial resources also available for folks if they have questions about finances and dealing with a person, particularly that might have Alzheimer's or dementia. Won't go into all these in detail for today's discussion, but you're not alone. There are lots of resources, and there is help available for those in need. I'm going to just quickly go over just a couple more, and then we're going to allow time for Q&A. And as need be, Karen and I will stay on a bit longer, even past our time if needed, to help additional questions. The most important thing is really, not the most important, but a key thing is creating that backup plan. And I've mentioned this multiple times, talking with family members and friends about who would take over different caregiving responsibilities. If a trust is set up, who are the trustees in addition to perhaps yourself or your spouse? But sharing the responsibilities. Originally, when my dad got ill with cancer, it was my brother and I. We just took it on. Then we, expanded the responsibilities to our overall families. My wife, my sister-in-law were significantly involved. We spread the wealth, and that helped take some of the weight off our shoulders. Extremely important things to be able to do. Don't just try to strap it on by yourself. There are a range of resources to help. But little things, even like keeping up to date on the medical information. My brother-in-law who's got some special needs, we had to figure out after my mother-in-law passed what his current medications were. We knew what his old medications were, but we had to not only ask him, we had to reconfirm after we asked him what he specifically was on, so we could help make sure that he was getting his medications and taking them on a regular basis. So all these things are extremely important, but always have a backup plan. Don't assume that the plan you have is going to be right. If things change, okay, what are we going to do? If finances change, what are we going to do? If they get ill for a different issue, what are we going to do? All extremely important. I mentioned this up front about taking care of your own health. So important. Some of our friends are just like our friends, Fran and Sammy. They've been honestly exhausted. They loved caring for their mother, Sammy's mom. It made such a major difference to them. There's so much they got out of it, but it was exhausting and financially challenging as well. But you got to take care of yourself in order to be able to take care of your loved ones. So exercising, eating well, it may be hard to do, but it's extremely important to get some of that respite care. So all these things are extremely important for, you've got to be healthy in order to be, be a good caregiver. And last, I'm just going to mention, as I said, that helpline, that 800-272-3900, you can call that number at any time if you have any questions about Alzheimer's, dementia, caregiving. There's so many resources. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Please feel free to give them a call at any time, or you can just go even online if you want, alz.org. You can type in about caregiving. You can type in caregiving support groups. There's plenty here in the Washington area. Because sharing tips and tricks, or just being able to vent and communicate with others that have been dealing with relatives or loved ones that are dealing with the disease. A lot of resources. And with that, I'm going to go off of share here, and we can open it up back to Steve for Q&As and anything that people
no, and not surprising, this is a topic of finance. Anything finance brings up a lot of questions. So first off, can you just clarify what cyber power of attorney is that you mentioned.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's the exact quote legal term. What it was, and now we put it in place for our kids and for ourselves, is that say if my wife and I were to pass, our children now will have the ability to contact, say it's Amazon or whatnot, and or have any access to our online accounts legally. When my niece passed away, my brother did not have that access. So he knew she had certain accounts, but could not legally, they would not legally talk with him. Now, a lot of the attorneys are putting those in place, whether it's a trust or power of attorney, just to make sure that folks have access to that. I don't know if that helps.
Okay, great. We got a ton of people that want the workbook. By any chance, is it something that we might be able to upload and just make available to everybody? Or is it at a link on the Alzheimer's site where we could share that with them?
So Steve, I'm going to actually be sending out a follow-up email with this. It's going to have downloadable
Okay, good.
link to the workbook, as well as some of the slides with the resources on it.
Okay.
And I
great.
have that from the registration list. So everybody that's registered, I have their email. It will go out to them.
Okay, great. Let's see. Nancy shares, I saw a friend whose husband gave $50 to $100 with every mail solicitation he received, and it amounted to thousands of dollars. Susan asks, can the limit be set only for ATM withdrawals, or can it also be set for checks cashed at a teller in the bank?
Yes, absolutely. As far as I understand, because based on the examples that other folks have given us and other professionals, yes, you can set the example of that family that came and the father was taken to the bank. He could only withdraw $200. He had $20,000 in his account, but at any one time he was only able to withdraw $200. So they had set that up in advance. So yes, we strongly recommend that, not only for checking outs, for credit card accounts as well, if at all possible. Any account where money can be withdrawn or used, you want to try to put limits in place, and doing that with the person ahead of time as part of planning versus waiting till they're cognitively impaired.
And I would even say this is a great practice beyond our elders. For example, with my business, I have a limit on the amount that a check can be processed online. And because there are these hackers out there that could potentially get into our account, at least you've limited your losses with, if they get in there and they can process a check, it's going to be less than a certain amount. Let's see. Patty Hansen brings up a profession that I'm a huge advocate of, and that is daily money managers. Mm-hmm. And she says, do you ever suggest hiring a daily money manager? It's something that I certainly suggest, because especially if somebody's got healthcare concerns, you've got this trusted person that is reviewing the finances. One of the other benefits of daily money managers, is a lot of times the ones that come and meet with you on a weekly basis, the daily money management is just part of what they're doing. The other part is the companionship, the support, sometimes driving you to the grocery store and things like that.
Excellent point.
Okay. Oh, okay, great. And then let's see. Chuck says, what about trusts? What about setting up a disability trust to care for a person? Is this an irrevocable trust or something other?
Yeah, so I only can talk about from personal. We have trusts set up. We have a special needs trust for my brother-in-law, for example. That's definitely where you might want to get professional assistance. Because in our case, if something were to happen to us, we want to make sure that my brother-in-law was cared for in the way that he needs to be cared for due to his illness. So we have a special needs trust set up specifically for that. We had to do that. That was not in place when my mother-in-law passed. We just put that in place recently because based on legal guidance that we received. Everyone's situation is a little bit different. I would definitely look into trusts, both for personal issues as well as those for a loved one.
Okay, great. And I dropped in some links to daily money managers and elder law attorneys. You know, most of these providers, a lot of times people are intimidated. It's like, oh, I can't afford an attorney or something like that. Most of these providers will chat with you for 15 to 20 minutes and get an understanding of your situation, give you some guidance, whether or not you become a client or not. Nobody needs to walk this road alone. Let's see. Okay, let me get back to, all right. Let's see. Speak to the importance of getting a power of attorney financial documents signed before a loss of cognitive function. Once someone is deemed seriously cognitively impaired by the physician, they cannot sign these docs, and even a good-willed family member will have to go to court for guardianship.
Right. And I want to highlight that point. I want to stomp on that so significantly. That was the issue with Mark and Caroline, our best friends, and them waiting to have the conversation with their parents until the point where it got too late and the courts had to get involved. If they had had these conversations a year earlier, where they were concerned about rocking the boat, getting the parents upset, they waited, and then they ended up in a much, much more difficult situation. It got worked out. I totally agree. Getting those legal documents set up and agreed to, and understanding this person's wishes well in advance. They're difficult conversations to have, but they're so important.
Great. And let's see here. Okay. And just to let everybody know, this is recorded. Leslie will email it out to everybody, but we'll also have it at proaging.com. And that is 1 o'clock, right on the dot. Okay. I think it's, again, a reminder that this was just a taste of this program that Alzheimer's Association has created. And again, like, I get calls on a pretty much a daily, weekly basis of caregivers that are family members that are just, the topic, even though they're calling about memory impairment with mom and dad, the topic always turns to finance. I can't imagine what Alzheimer's Association nationwide
Oh my gosh.
receives, which has led them down this path, which I think is a great path to provide resources to families in this area. Aaron, thank you for giving us a taste of this. Leslie, thank you for bringing this to my attention and to our community's attention. And thanks to our community members for all the great questions, of which there is one more that says, who can do the full Alzheimer's course? When will it be available, and where will it be available? And I believe
Tall Oaks Assisted Living.
Yeah. So
and I are in the works to get that scheduled to do an in-person event, hopefully in the fall. We need to get with our calendar, but yeah, it will be within the year and more extensive.
So if you're in the DC metro area and Northern Virginia, Tall Oaks Assisted Living is great. We realize that our community has expanded all over the place, and by following up with Aaron or Karen, if you're not in the Northern Virginia region to take that class, then they can connect you with other locations where you could take it. And I'm assuming, and if not, it's something that should be done, is you could probably are you guys setting up the course so that it can be taken online as well?
Yeah, I think that's what they're looking at right now. And there's actually even revisions. I mentioned I'm on this National Advisory Committee. And one of the things that we're doing is, again, not just this kind of program, but multiple programs to enhance and make it easier for online use, as well as a range of in-person use.
Okay, great. All right, folks. Well, thanks a million. And we will be seeing you at a future discussion. All right.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Aaron.